I'm Simon Williams and I'm currently a Senior Sergeant with the Western Australia Police. Prior to that I was a police officer with West Midlands Police for nearly 16 years. I first heard about evidence-based policing when I was running offender management teams in Birmingham, and we partnered with the University of Cambridge to deliver what was then the biggest randomised control trial in policing anywhere in the world, called Operation Turning Point. So Operation Turning Point was a test of deferred prosecution of low-level or first-time offenders away from the criminal justice system. And that was my introduction into this concept, this thing called evidence-based policing. Evidence-based policing is it's just common sense. It's what works, what doesn't, and what looks promising to keep your communities safer than they were yesterday. So the presentation I've just given was about a hotspots policing experiment that we conducted in Armidale in Western Australia. It tested the effectiveness of some targeted patrol time in micro hotspots where there's chronic or long-term crime problems. They were all public place generated crimes, so nothing that had happened behind closed doors and nothing that had been self-generated by police. So seizure of weapons or drugs. These were all public generated sort of street level crimes such as burglary, robbery, disorders, assaults, public place violence, damages, those kind of offences. There's a wealth of evidence on the efficacy of or effectiveness of putting a cop in a small micro hotspot, a small place for around about 15 minutes to cool those hotspots down, so to prevent crime happening. But most hotspots experiments involve cops having to go back to each of those hotspots day after day after day. What we did in Perth was slightly different. We designed the experiment so we could test not just the initial crime prevention effects that most hotspot studies will look at, but we were able to measure how long do those crime prevention effects last. So there's two things there that I've just described. The first is initial deterrence and then residual deterrence. So how long can we afford not to go back to those places before things start to go really wrong again and crime returns to previous levels? We found that certainly in Perth, at least, police can afford to conduct one 14-minute patrol in a hotspot, and they don't have to return for the next 4 days. But if they leave it more than 5 days without returning, then crime and the severity of offending as well returns to pre-patrol levels. When we looked at the overall count, so the frequency of crimes, there was a 22% reduction when we put one patrol of 14 minutes in to a hotspot per day compared to business as usual policing. That resulted in 224 fewer victims of crime, but more significantly, the crime that was left over was far less severe. That severity was measured by a crime harm index, the WA crime harm index. That saw a 62% reduction. In addition, when we look at the breakdown between days where we patrolled compared to periods where the hotspots were left unpatrolled for up to 4 days and more than 5 days, the severity of offending significantly increased by a factor of about 4 if hotspots are left unpatrolled for 5 or more days. This is a really cool finding for anybody else that's looking at these small micro locations, concentrations of crime or concentrations of severe offending, where actually we don't have to keep going back every day. We can afford to go and put a patrol in place and then maybe not revisit for another couple of days, or certainly up to 4 days. Now, when you think about the current picture, particularly in the UK, but not just the UK, austerity in policing is an issue for police leaders across the globe. Resources are pretty finite, and demand on police services is pretty high. So we don't have to take up those resources, to take up that resource time by continually going back every single day. You can actually hit more hotspots less of the time and have a greater effect. I would say to any sergeant out there who doesn't think that their team has time, this experiment and other experiments that have tested how effective patrol, these short doses, these short stays, stints of patrol are, have all been delivered as business as usual, with no additional resources, no overtime, and they can be done. Certainly the experiment that I presented on today in Armidale in Perth was conducted at a time when local policing resources were really under pressure. There was certainly no budget for overtime. Demand was high because of the time of year that the experiment was conducted in, and we did it. We were able to do it as part of business as usual. It's not easy. You have to be resilient. You have to provide a feedback loop to officers. You have to hold people to account. You have to have difficult conversations. But this is about keeping the community safe. This is about cooling down really chronic long-term places that are home to lots of different crimes. And many of those crimes have got real victims, real people who really suffer as a result. And I always say that this should go back to why we're here. We're here to serve the community, not ourselves. And it's really, really important that where you've got evidence that something works, and it's really strong evidence, that's something that we should adopt into our business as usual, or at least test it in our own area. If you haven't got access to any of the clever software that can work out or predict where crimes might happen, then you can simply do what many other police forces and jurisdictions have done to look at crime in place, and that's simply by putting a grid across your policing area or district or wherever it is you're looking, and simply measuring the concentration of crime, so the number of crimes and then the severity of offending in those places, compared to all of the other grids in that area. You can definitely do this by yourself. I would always say, if you've got the opportunity to partner with an academic institution or an academic that's got a particular skill set in this area, then take that opportunity. But if you haven't, most of the evidence that's out there is freely available. A lot of it's open access. A lot of it's pretty easy to read these days. And it's something that you could quite easily set up and do yourself. I think this is one of my biggest bugbears about evidence-based policing, is that a team of people, platoon police officers, academics, will partner with the local policing district or area, and they will deliver an experiment. They'll track where officers are going. They will track what officers are doing when they're there. They might even do community surveys to look at trust and confidence. But the moment that experiment stops and there's enough data gathered, the tracking stops, the feedback stops, and inevitably, and quite sadly, the business as usual prior to the experiment goes back to normal. Now, if I was going to go and run Armidale again, I would factor in a 2 or 3 month period after we'd hit the point where we got enough data to say, right, we're going to continue to run this experiment and allow that lag to be able to go and conduct the analysis, and then go back to the leadership teams there to say, here's the effect, here's what we found. Now you can either continue to do those patrols if we've had a positive effect, or if actually they've made no difference, then maybe we need to rethink it. But I think if I was going to, any future experiments I run around this particular space or anything else, I think I will be factoring in exactly that. So we don't, all that hard work and effort that goes into changing what business as usual is, doesn't just get, doesn't just return to, pre-experiment conditions. The reason why I've come to present this work at the SEBB conference, apart from being invited, is evidence-based policing talks to 3 T's traditionally. That's targeting problems, tracking what cops do, so outputs, and testing interventions, so different ways of tackling or solving a problem. In West Australia we talk about a 4th T, and that's telling. So I think the biggest problem I've seen over time is that quite often there'll be some fantastic research that's done right across policing, but unless we go and tell these stories, unless we take the time to actually speak to colleagues face to face and make that or make those findings jump off a page, who's got time to read a 6,000 word journal article? Which police leaders do you know that sit and read criminology, or the Journal of Experimental Criminology, or even the Society of Evidence-Based Policing journal, Police Science? It's time consuming and we're all busy. So I think one of the most important things that anyone that's involved in evidence-based policing, evidence-based practice can do is factor in time to go and talk about what you did, what you found, and how it happened. And that's true when you have a fantastic finding like Armadale hotspots in Perth, but equally true if you do something and it doesn't go well, or you have a backfiring effect or no effect at all, because actually there's probably more learning when we don't get it right. And I think that's there's some cultural barriers in policing around that, where generally previously we've been, any police operation or strategy that's been put together has been doomed to succeed. That's not what, and that's the other thing that evidence-based policing gives you. It gives us the ability to actually to keep ourselves honest in policing, and really understand cause and effect relationships. I think that in general the relationship and the communication between academics and policing has always been seen as quite poor, but I think in my experience, certainly over the last 9 or 10 years of being involved in this kind of this area of policing, it's got significantly better, and there's now a wealth of interest, and I think it's down to trust, to be honest with you. I think that over time and gradually, by police opening the doors and actually sharing data, and academics being able to come and take that data away and add value and answer questions that police leaders want answering, I think that there's now real value seen in partnering with academic institutions and really understanding in some depth what our data means. I think the key messages from our experience in Armadale are, if you're planning to test a strategy that involves directed patrol or targeted patrol, partner with an academic, involve your local community, and be really clear on the expectations to the officers that are going to deliver and manage the delivery of this patrol.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found this content useful. You can get access to each video's transcript with key learning points, timestamps and references if you get yourself onto my mailing list. Just go to the main Dr. IPIP website on dripip.com, and on the bottom of each page you will find a sign-up form for notifications of new content. Just enter your first name, your preferred email address, and the type of organization you work for. You will not get any spam. This is just for me to let you know about new content and for you to get access to all the transcripts.